And 2 years after the Mediterranean migrant crisis blew a hole in the European Union, tentative efforts by EU leaders to patch up differences over what to do with refugees underline the continuing rifts among the bloc's leaders. German Chancellor Angela Merkel says there's still a lot of work to be done. This comes after her discussion with her EU counterparts on the bloc's defunct asylum rules. Divisions over how to share out relatively small numbers of refugees have poisoned relations in the EU, complicating efforts to present a united front in talks with London on Brexit and to agree an EU budget out to 2028. Meanwhile, dozens of African refugees, including some who've been stranded in Libya, will arrive next week in a small eastern French village as part of efforts to resettle asylum seekers whose requests have been examined directly in Africa. The move is set to fit into a United Nations strategy to provide protection for refugees and other vulnerable migrants who attempt to travel to Libya, often intended to make the dangerous sea crossing to Italy. According to French officials, the 56 refugees, including 21 children and teenagers, will be the first to arrive in France as part of a commitment by the government in August to take in 3,000 refugees living in Chad and Niger by 2019. Mayor Jean-Claude Dissot says that the refugees who come from countries including Eritrea, Sudan and Ethiopia will live in a small village near the border with Germany. And staying with the migrant crisis, thousands of refugees are fleeing Cameroon to Nigeria as a military crackdown on Anglophone separatists intensifies, with the United Nations preparing for up to 40,000 people crossing the border. The new flood of people threatens to further strain the country's limited resources, with the government already tackling millions of people displaced by the conflict with Boko Haram in the northeast.
Anglophones in Cameroon have been crossing into Nigeria for months, walking for up to 3 days across bushes, fleeing violence in the southwest and northwest regions after a recent deployment of troops to crack down on separatists. Violence in the Anglophone region of Cameroon has spiraled since last year when the government forces crushed peaceful protests by teachers and lawyers protesting their perceived marginalization by the French-speaking majority. What began last year as peaceful protests by Anglophone activists against perceived marginalization by Cameroon's Francophone-dominated elite has become the biggest challenge yet to President Paul Biya, who will seek to renew his 35-year in power in an election next year. The separatists have killed at least 8 soldiers and policemen over the past month as part of their campaign to break from the capital Yaoundé in Francophone Cameroon and form a separate state called Ambazonia.
They attacked their Bazonian soldiers who were so peaceful, who was waiting for peaceful demonstration, and were working for peaceful demonstration since. But it's because of the killing of our innocent people. That is why our own people have started reacting.
The UN Refugee Agency, UNHCR, and their partner NGO, Rema Care, have been registering refugees who have been arriving in Nigeria are yet to set up camps for them. Aid agencies say they are concerned that the numbers will swell, putting undue pressure on the local community, not to mention forcing the refugees to stay in dangerously cramped conditions.
Some of the communities they entered in, they were just about, let's say, 1,000 persons in that community. And getting 2 square meals a day was not easy for some of these families. Now they have had to have maybe 2, 3, 4 additional persons on the same budget that they had. So some of these refugees are really going through tough times.
According to the United Nations, more than 5,000 have fled Anglophone Cameroon across the border to Nigeria since October 1. The number of refugees is expected to increase to 40,000. The new arrivals live with host families who have supported them with food, clothing and shelter.
Now, there's more on the migrant issue, and this time the Russian ambassador to Libya, Ivan Molotkov, has hinted that his country is open to working with the United States to solve the crisis in Libya. He says Moscow is ready to initiate the lifting of an international arms embargo on Libya, but that can only be done once the North African country has a united army. Well, in other news, now judges at the International Criminal Court have awarded damages worth $10 million to children recruited by the Congolese warlord Thomas Lubanga. Mr. Lubanga was found guilty of abducting the boys and girls, some as young as 11, in 2012. The boys were forced to fight in Ituri region of Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, while the girls were used as sex slaves. Lubanga was sentenced to 14 years in jail and is held liable for the payment of compensation. Well, the court insists that he was indigent, and so it's not clear where the money will come from. Well, still to come on the program, e-hailing companies with mobile apps connect drivers with passengers. Just stay with us.